Well, here we are today. We're talking with Landon over here at Grindstone Media, and it's kind of fascinating to hear Landon's story and how he got here. And so we're going to spend some time talking today, learning a little bit more about Grindstone Media, what they do, and give people an opportunity to kind of see what this young entrepreneur is doing right here in Lincoln. So Landon, why don't you start and just introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, my name is Landon Rhodes. I grew up on a farm north of Exeter, Nebraska. So farm kid, grew up with those sort of, work ethic and values and whatnot. And, just grew up under some really hardworking parents, and went to University of Nebraska after that to pursue, what I thought was going to be my career in agriculture. And then from that point forward, went and worked for a couple different companies in the ag tech sector. After that, decided I wanted to, have some more upward mobility in my potential. Went to start into a sales career still in the ag field, and basically decided that I was really bad at sales. And I found that out by going out and doing it. And so that was kind of like how this all kind of got started, was finding out that I was horrible at selling door to door.
Excellent. So tell me a little bit. Okay, so first of all, it's interesting. You're a farm kid from Exeter, Nebraska, and here you are. You decided, I'm going to stay in Lincoln. I'm not going to go back to the family farm. So what was it that gave you the idea of Grindstone Media? Like, what was that? Like, the light came on, and it was like, okay, I'm going to start Grindstone, and here it is today.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said before, just being bad at sales. I would go knock on doors, and I would try and sell commodity risk management services or consulting services to farmers. And if they don't know you, like, my dad's a farmer, and I knew that. I knew that walking into it. My dad's a farmer, and if they don't know who you are, they're probably not going to give you a whole bunch of time. So I had to come, donuts in hand, coffee in hand, prepared to basically get told no. And I learned to hear no a lot, and that was the impetus to starting Grindstone, because I was so bad at door-to-door selling, or perceivably so bad at it, and grew impatient with the process. I was like, there's got to be a better way for us to draw business into us rather than going out and grabbing it. And so I started looking up different ways to do that, and marketing and branding and all that stuff came up, and I just was a sponge when it came to all of those different parts of marketing, and social media was kind of the next big thing, right? So I decided to learn how to shoot video, and before long I had created a series for the client, or for our client now, which used to be my boss at Trados, called The Morning Minute, and it was just a 1-minute synopsis of what the grain markets were doing. No one was doing that though, and no one was consistent with it. So I was self-taught from everything from video production to shooting to post-production. Everything was all self-taught, and then decided to start pull away from my job there. And it was a side hustle for about 8 months. And then finally, May of 2018 kind of kicked off and went full-time into Grindstone.
That's awesome. So you're there, you're working along, you decide, I've got this side hustle, and now I want to make it a full hustle. We'll call it the full hustle.
Full hustle.
So what's the vision for Grindstone? What do you want to see out of Grindstone? Like, when, let's say 5 years from now, what's your vision of what people are going to say? What was your vision to do?
Yeah, the vision obviously changes a little bit, when you're starting off and you're in I'm on my apartment floor. That's kind of where I started with that. So like the vision at that time was just like, okay, let's have an office, maybe have a few people helping out. Maybe I won't be the only one going on shoots anymore. Like, that was the vision at the beginning. But now the vision's a lot more clear, in the sense that we'll become a full service video production and digital marketing agency built around our customers. So having emphasis and a lot of understanding of how the agricultural and industrial sectors work, we'll use that leverage to basically get ourselves deep rooted into the blue collar industry, blue collar jobs, and blue collar careers. So basically the vision for Grindstone is to continue to expand in video production, podcasting, web design, and become a true full service agency. And then from that point, just continue to serve outside of the state of Nebraska, because it's heavily based in Nebraska now. So I see us going to Kansas City. I see us going to Colorado, a lot of different places, but just heavily serve the industrial or blue collar market and continue to expand.
Very good. Mm-hmm. So you started on the floor in your apartment.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden we're here. You've got this beautiful facility. You've got nice studios. You've got all kinds of awesome production equipment. You've got employees now. Like, this has really become a thing. But I've got to imagine, since you started that side hustle and you're on the floor of your apartment and you decided to go out on your own, like, tell us, what were some of the hurdles you had to jump over, or, you know, what were some of the struggles you had just trying to get like to this? Like, I'm imagining you didn't, like, one day you packed up the couple boxes in your apartment and moved in, and here you have this studio. So what was it?
Yeah. And for the kind of the record of all of this is, like, I don't feel like we're near as far, like, my vision far outweighs, like, where we are today, but because we're constantly learning, constantly growing. So I'm probably not the best at, like, stopping to smell the roses type of thing and kind of, like, appreciate where we've gotten to. It's more like I just have such high expectations for myself and for what we're capable of, because I know we have a great team and, like, killer, like, set of people around us. But I would say what I learned from that was, I mean, early stages was, you can't do it all alone if you want to be successful. If you want to be successful, you have to move with the team. Like, I learned that really early. I would say I differ from that a lot. And my dad has a team of people that work with him out on the farm, very entrepreneurial, whole entire family's entrepreneurs. But, and he has, you know, a couple hired hands that help him on a daily basis. But I learned that very early, that, like, you need great people around you. You need talented people that really, like, care. And that's the only way you'll be able to move fast and accomplish big things, because you can be the best. I mean, even the best directors in the world, the best filmmakers in the world have anywhere from a 10 to a 30-person team with them. And they may be the director, but those directors are nothing without the gaff people, your lighting people, your audio people. Like, all those people matter, and the production equipment people. So I think I learned that really early. Lessons, what other lessons beside that? Sales is a full-time thing. It never stops. Even if you're focused on ops, sales can never stop while you're growing, especially if you have an aggressive growth plan like ours is. You don't ever just, like, slow down and kind of, like, let sales sit to the side, because in 60 to 90 days you'll feel every bit of that come back at you.
Absolutely. So what's been your biggest failure getting from your apartment floor to a wonderful studio that we sit in today?
Biggest failure.
Or was there a day where you're just like, you know what, dude, it's time to pack your bags, and I'm going to go back to Exeter, and I'm going to, you know, say, hey, Mom, Dad, I'm back.
Yeah.
What?
No,
you know?
I would say that's never even, like, I don't think I have that. Like, I don't know. I don't think I have, like, that mode of, or I've never gotten to that point where I'm like, I got to pack this in and just be done. I just am way too optimistic, and I think that there's always something else that we can do. And even, like, the darkest of times that would be a perceived failure or just, like, bad luck, you know, sometimes stuff just happens. And I don't think I've ever once said, like, I think I'm done with this, you know, like, even, and I've been through there's been plenty of bad times with it, but yeah.
What was, like, your worst time in this? What was the hardest thing you had to deal with as a business owner? Like, where you just
probably just learning to become, like, a manager of people and a boss, versus just managing myself. I would say, like, and it's not just one failure I can point at, I would say it's a long line of consistent, really bad failures, and my team can maybe attest to this, but just becoming a better manager of people and becoming a better boss that, you know, the team really looks up to, something I'm constantly trying to get better at. And what I would say early is, like, when you're communicating expectation, when it's just you're communicating that expectation to you and maybe one person. When you have a team of 5 people and then yourself, it's not just you anymore. So you have to make sure that you're communicating that expectation to the team and not just assuming they know things that, you know, they don't. And, like, setting clear expectations and then owning all of your problems. Every issue that this company has is my fault. Every single one. So, like, I've really taken that upon myself. As, like, even if, you know, something goes wrong or this person does this, it's like you put them in that position to do that, or you didn't train them well enough to do that. And so I take a lot of that burden, all of that burden on myself. And that's really empowering, because then you have the ability to change it.
So what kind of things have you done? Like I'm always one, again, just trying to continue to grow myself, whether it's as a manager, as a leader, as someone in the community or what have you. Like, what are some things you've done to invest in Landon? Like,
a lot.
I think self-growth and investing in yourself, and I'm probably the worst to give the advice, because I went through a period of about half a dozen years where I just didn't invest in myself and pour into helping me be better so I could help my people be better. And now it's like, no, that's not an option. So like, what are the things that you've done to invest in yourself to help you as a better manager of people?
Yeah. So that's one way it helped me, but I felt like, even, and maybe you feel the same way, but I felt like from the stage of like 0, like when I was obviously just a kid, to like 22, or even, let's just be fair and say like 16 to 22, like nothing personal development wise was even remotely rolling around my head. Nothing about, I mean, I was kind of entrepreneurial in the sense that I like to sell things. Like I would sell like Boy Scout popcorn, that sort of thing, and sweet corn on the side of the road, but nothing really triggered as to like, oh, I need to start reading so I can get good at this, and I need to become a better leader of people. Like, none of that came until like 22, 23, 24. But once that hit, it was like a light switch got turned on. You're like, wow, like all this stuff is happening. All these people are my age or younger or a little bit older and making great money and have these crazy lifestyles where they can, not necessarily like the whole jet thing, but it's more or less like just an understanding that like you can run your own schedule and have freedom on your side, and you kind of write your own rules for your success or failure. And that really opened my eyes to like just constantly investing in podcasts, in a lot of time into podcasts. Like I would learn, I think in 2019, I listened to 17,000 minutes or some ridiculous amount of time. Wow. Of podcasts. Yeah. And so like I'm a podcast fiend, constantly listening to try and get better, and I'll find new people, and I really, really learn well that way. And then I've never been a great reader. Like my sister was 4.0 student, incredible reader. She would always read in the back of the car. I was the exact opposite, like pretty bad student, not a great reader. And I'm sure those two things had to do a lot with each other. Comprehension skills were trash. But I learned through video and kinesthetically, and like learned a lot of different ways, but reading a book was never it. So it was always like watching a video or listening to a podcast. And then eventually I started getting more and more into books, audiobooks, that sort of thing. And I mean, I spent a ton of money and time on investing in myself, because what else do you have, right? I mean,
yeah, exactly. Well, if you're not investing in your most valuable asset, which is yourself, it's hard to grow. And so who are some of the like podcasts or audiobooks or something like that like your go-tos? Like, this is an author or a podcaster that just connects with me. Mm-hmm. Like I'm a book guy. Okay. And so I love to read books. Yeah. So, but my books for fun are like leadership, management, like John Maxwell, Lencioni, all those kind of things. And so like, but that's for fun for me. Like I'm not into like thrillers or anything like that, but like who's maybe somebody you've connected with? Like this is somebody like when they have a new podcast and I get an alert, like I got to get to it right away. And what is it about them that helps motivate you?
Yeah, so seeing what's possible, right? Like seeing what these guys have accomplished, seeing where they came from. And I think that's part of why I started a podcast, is because I want to document these years. I want to document the fact that I was hopefully I look back and say like I was horrible at speaking or something, like maybe I hope I look back and like can laugh at my younger self for like, the attempt, and like be grateful that I have the content. But no, just seeing what's possible, I think has been a really big like vision stretching thing for me. So looking at Andy Frisella, Ed Milet, Gary Vee, who else? Patrick Bet-David, like those 4 characters a lot have really helped me recently, and then also 3 or 4 years ago even. Like I'd listened to those same guys, and Mel Robbins as well. She's been incredibly interesting to listen to. But yeah, just hearing like where they came from and what they were able to create with their life. I mean, I'm really big into self-made people. If you inherited the money, like it's probably not going to be super interesting for me to like listen to it, because I can't relate. Like I didn't inherit a fortune, and it's now like I love listening to those self-made people just to hear what's possible and see what's possible.
Very cool. Mm-hmm. So what is it that made you decide like I'm gonna put my flag in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I'm going to build my business in Lincoln. What was it about Lincoln and why Lincoln that made you build your company here?
Heavily focused around family. I have a ton of family within a 45-mile radius. Like almost all of my family is within a 50-mile radius of Lincoln. So blessed to have both sets of grandparents on mom and dad's side, and like leaving just in my mind just didn't make any sense. And then also like the more and more I get kind of like inside of the Lincoln market in the business world. I mean, like you said, I think you told me one time, I think there's 17,000 businesses here. You don't think like, I think that's 7% of the population. Like you don't think of 7% of the population being entrepreneurs, but that's crazy if you think about it. And I've just really enjoyed the entrepreneurial community of like getting to know different business owners and, you know, young hustling kids that are even 19. I mean, we met some kids that are 19, 20 years old that are doing stuff that I wish I was even thinking about at age 22. And, you know, they're doing big things at 19. So it's really cool to see kind of a younger generation of entrepreneur growing up in Lincoln. And then also like my age group and a little bit older is just like, I feel like on fire right now in that sphere. So
yeah, it's fascinating to see kind of like the way the world changes, because like, okay, so my kids are 19, 15, and 8. Mm-hmm. And, you know, like when I was 8 or 15, it was, you know, I want to do this. I want to do, you know, there was the police and firefighter that went through my mind. And then there was the
lawyer.
Like I wanted to be a lawyer.
Yeah.
I never had a desire to be a doctor. I don't know why. But like at one point I wanted to be like a stockbroker on Wall Street and all that kind of stuff. And now we get into like the podcasters, or I want to be a YouTuber, or, you know, there's kind of just this whole generational shift. And I think for me, the one thing I love about Lincoln is just how like Lincoln embraces that. Like if you think of some of the startups and, you know, the fact that they call it the Silicon Prairie is, I never would have thought that. Like 30 years ago when I was going to high school in Lincoln, I never would have thought, wow, it's, you know, this is going to be
entrepreneurial.
It's going to be
buzz,
this
right?
entrepreneurial thing. And like even my 8-year-old, one time we were driving around and she says, you know what I think I want to do when I grow up? And I'm like, okay, this should be fun. She's like, I want to be an entrepreneur. I'm like,
when did you hear that?
Like within the last 6 months or so.
Oh,
from
wow,
my
that's
8-year-old.
amazing. That's so cool.
And I'm
though.
like, so I'm like driving down the street.
You're like, how do you know what that is?
And I'm like, what did you say? And she's like, I want to be an entrepreneur. I'm like, where do you learn about this
It's
stuff?
amazing. So did you ask her
through
what
JA, Junior Achievement. They have
Amazing.
Junior Achievement in every grade in her school. And it's like, wow, that's pretty cool, because I didn't come from that generation. Like, I mean, entrepreneurship was something that we knew about.
What did it, yeah, I'm really curious now. What did it mean, though, when you were my age? Like, when you were my age and you were looking at somebody that was, quote, entrepreneur, was there, like, a stigma to that, almost?
Not necessarily a stigma, but like, it was like, how can you do that? Like, is that possible? You know, like, I think about, and my story's kind of weird because I have a side hustle that started kind of just by happenstance, and I never in my life dreamed that I would own my own business. And it was like, well, if I'm going to do this and help this person out, then I'm going to start a business, because I'm going to run that through the business, right? But I've always had kind of this entrepreneurial spirit, but in a different way. And it was always kind of for, and always has been kind of for someone else or an organization kind of bigger than myself. And so I never had that. So it's kind of interesting to hear that story of, you know, I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I decided that I was terrible at sales.
Yeah.
So I decided I had to figure out another way. And so it's just kind of fascinating to me to see that, because, like, you know, podcasters and YouTubers, it's like, okay, that, you know, in my day that'd been like, you're going to be a what? Or,
like
that's a what? What's a YouTuber? Like, is that somebody that goes down the Niobrara and leads like excursions or something?
Like even like somebody like Larry King, who's built a media, you know, broadcasting empire.
Yeah.
No one would look at Larry King back probably 20 years ago and be like, oh yeah, I want to be like Larry King. But now there's literally thousands of people doing that.
Like for me, I wanted to be Charlie Sheen on Wall Street.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I mean, when I was in high school, late high school, college, like that movie came out and I was like, that's who I want to be. I want to be that guy, you know, talking to Gordon Gekko,
Yep.
being the stock guy and all that kind of stuff. And here we are. I mean, like, I never quite made it to Wall Street, but I'm okay with that.
I love that too. And I remember one little piece of advice, or like a kind of a story that I remember my dad telling me when I was super young. And this is kind of like the first eye-opening, I think, of like what entrepreneurship really means. And like he goes, it was planting season, very busy time for corn and soybean farmers, and he goes, I walked up to him like, I have a baseball game in Wilbur tonight, like don't worry about coming, like I know you're super busy, like I'm probably not gonna play anyway. There was a huge class ahead above us, like 13 guys, and they were all studs. And so then I'm 14th on the bench from 9-player team, and even if I was the best, even then they're like, oh, we got to give playing time to those. But he would say, like, he like stopped me like when we were walking back from the shop or something, and he was just like, I'm coming to your game. I'm like, but you don't have to. He's like, I'm coming to your game. And when you own your own business someday and you make your own hours, you'll understand. But I have the freedom to do whatever I want when I want, because I make my own rules and I set my own hours. And that's kind of a light bulb, I would say. Like, even when I was like 8-9 years old, like, oh, that's what that means. Yeah. Freedom, right?
Very cool.
Freedom. I mean, you work an insane amount of hours.
Exactly.
And he's one of the hardest workers I know, and worked 80-hour weeks most of his life. But he had the freedom to do that.
He had the freedom to do it, but he also had his priorities set. Like, okay, even though my son might not be playing, I want to be there for that, and right. I don't want to miss that. And so, so I've heard you talk a lot about your dad, and it sounds like he's kind of an inspiration to you a little bit, because he's an entrepreneur in a different way. He's a business owner in a different way than you are, but at the end of the day, you're both entrepreneurs, you're both business owners. Who are some of the other people that you've drawn inspiration from?
Yeah, Dad and Grandpa are huge, just in the way of like work ethic and willingness to help in the community and stuff. Like, just, and my mom too. Like, I remember like walking upstairs in the kitchen one morning, my mom is like baking like 100 kolaches. I'm like, why are you baking? Like, what is this for? Like, do we have a funeral or something to go to? Like, what happened, right? And she's like, no, this is just for our landlords. I'm just like, they're for our landlords? Like, I want kolaches. And just like, no.
I want in on that deal.
And there was no reason why she was doing it. She's just like, no, it's just what you do. She didn't say anything else, and she just kept baking. And I was like, okay. And that was super normal for my grandma, for my mom, both sides, same thing. Like, just this almost just crazy amount of customer service and like just respect they would show for the people they do business with. I think that was very inspirational for like how to treat customers and client service. And then work ethic from Dad and Grandpa, for sure. Both grandpas. My grandparents are 84 and the other one's 85. Grandpas are both 84 and 85. Both still farm. One farms on a cabless tractor still. Like, hard.
It's old school.
It's awesome. Yeah.
That's old
so
school.
Like, and that is about as real as it gets in terms of work ethic. And you know, they're lifelong workers and they never want to stop. And I have a feeling that that's the same. Like, I don't want to retire at 55, like, and go to a beach and sip a mojito. You know, like, that's, I don't think that's on the card. I'll do that for like a weekend, maybe.
Yeah, I was going to say, you get there about, you know, I always think about like, I'll get there, it'll be like the third or fourth day.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, okay, I need something to do.
Yeah.
Like,
what can I
sometimes
sell?
long weekends I struggle with, right? I mean, it's like, okay, I got a 4-day weekend. Okay, I got this done, this done, this done. Okay, now I got 3 days left. What am I going to do, right? And so you seem to have a lot of that same in you. So where do you want Grindstone to be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now?
5 years from now, I want Grindstone to be in multiple locations. So at minimum, have a location in Omaha, and then location in Kansas City as well. I have family in Kansas City, and definitely want to be doing much larger productions. I want to be working with large firms like, you know, the Fortune 500, Fortune 5,000 companies in the United States primarily. And I want us to be a national company that services nationally, not just in the Midwest. Like, I would be happy to go and build a team that can go remote and film and then bring it back all in and then edit in-house. But ultimately, like, the company has to continue to grow. And I know that the Lincoln market won't be able to sustain the amount of growth. Like, if you look at Arch Rival, Swanson Russell, any of these really big, successful, Bailey Kelly Lauerman, all these big successful agencies, all of them have had to branch outside of the state.
Yeah.
And like, I'm very comfortable with that. Right. So, just looking at like how the road was paved a little bit ahead of me, I think it's super important to know that like, if you want to grow to a 25, 50, $100 million business, you're absolutely going to be going outside of the state. And so preparing myself for that in the next 5 years, that we may not have a whole entire like 20-person office in Kansas City, but just even laying the groundwork to be a national company is something I want to focus on the next 5 years. And then in 10 years, probably national, international.
Wow, that's pretty fascinating. Tell me a little bit about like, what would you consider has been your biggest failure? That day where you just went, man, like, did you deliver?
I actually
like you were supposed to deliver a produced video for X company, and it actually had Y company's logo, or
that's never happened. Thank God. Knock on wood.
And that's good solid wood.
Yeah, right. We'll solid. No, I would say the day, and it was kind of like time leading up into when I kind of like failed to set expectation for one of my employees that left early. This person was super talented. They were really good at their job, and basically just the job description was unclear. A lot of our processes and procedures weren't there yet, and it was a startup. I mean, and like, I'm not saying that everybody is, I mean, it's not built for everybody, and the startup culture in general is not built for everybody, but I think I could have done a way better job as a leader of like having the expectation laid out to where they've very much understood, and this is something I struggle with a little bit today and trying to get better at too, is setting that expectation extremely straightforward to where you know if you're succeeding or failing and where that line is. And that's why we try and do like quarterly check-ins with all of our team to make sure like they understand like, hey, this is where you're sitting at right now. This is what I'd like to see to improve. This is what I want you to keep doing more of. And I think I failed big time to do that in the beginning, just because you're running, you're hustling, you're taking on jobs, you're just doing whatever you can to kind of stay afloat. So putting more emphasis on team reflection is probably one of my biggest failures in the early years.
Good.
Early years.
Like, tell me about the project where you got done and like you wanted to do a touchdown dance. You're just like, I just spiked it in the end zone.
That's an easy one.
I just won the Super Bowl.
That's an easy one.
I'm dancing in the end zone, and if you don't like it, don't let me get to the end zone.
Yeah, right. No, it's definitely Hausman, and my team probably all like knew that before I said it, because it's just one of the story is so good, right? Hausman Construction's video, they had a grand opening video, and the reason it turned out so good is because it was purely organic. It was Joey standing in front of a couple hundred people, Joey Hausman, the CEO, and he's standing there and he's just completely in the moment, and he's not scripted. He's not, nobody asked him questions. He just gave the speech, and he talked about what it was like starting out with, starting out from working on blueprints on a pool table in his garage with mice running around to running a 300-person construction management and GC firm, which I have a podcast with him specifically diving into those details. And like, to this day, that still blows my mind of like, he came from literally, like, he started it in a garage and built it to what it is today. And the way that was captured and just the words that were said inside of that video were so special. No one could have like asked that question in like an interview setting, in my opinion, and got the same response. It was just too organic and too real the way it happened. And like, that to me was a touchdown video for sure. That was a video where people were like, oh, they work with them. And then the second one after that would be Matt Talbot, where we interviewed a 4-time convicted felon that had been addicted to meth for 20 years, off and on, addicted to meth, all sorts of other different drugs, who completely turned his life around and now has full custody of his kids. He's been sober for over 3 years. He has a full-time job at Kawasaki, and shout out to Brian Green if you're watching this. And we just got really close to him during that process, and it was then we actually showed it at Matt Talbot's gala, Feeding the Soul of the City, in front of 400 people, and the guy stood up. He was in the video, and then he was also at the gala and stood up and received a standing ovation at the end of the video, which to this day, those are two of my favorite videos to the coolest experiences that I've ever had.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
So you talked about Hal's been working on that pool table in his garage with mice, and now he's got 300 firm. And you talked earlier about you were working in your apartment. The floor of your apartment was the Grindstone Worldwide headquarters.
Right.
And now here we are today. Now talk to me about like the studios, and tell me about the studios and what you're trying to accomplish. And then you told a cool story about the table that I think would be fun to share.
Yeah. So the studio was kind of an idea of like, how do we create more content? And I had to scratch my own itch of podcasting because I fell in love with it so much in the last 3 years. And how do we help people create more content is kind of the question I asked, because me or our team going out and filming you at your place of work, is quite expensive in terms of in cost comparison to you coming into a studio, which is a perfect environment that never changes and it's always here. And the cameras are always set up and they always look exactly the same. There's just way less work there, right? And way less time to put all of that together. So I just thought of a way like, wouldn't it be great if we could scale conversations and create lots of content out of this? So even this conversation, a 45 minute conversation, AJ will, our dedicated producer, will be able to go in and cut up 1 to 2 minute clips and then share those on social media to promote the long form of whatever you just did. And I can't take full credit for that idea because I listened to a guy named Gary Vee, and there was the Gary Vee content model, and it's just absolutely brilliant. And so we built something to facilitate that exact model: is take long form conversation, cut it up, and then disperse it across the internet to create awareness for your brand. And that's exactly what this place is for. And that's why there's video and audio, because it's not just about the podcast and getting it on Spotify and iTunes. It's about how you promote it with Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. And that's why we created this thing.
I almost feel like we're sitting in somebody's cabin here.
It's super warm, right?
Like it's this cool feeling. Like I want this to be a studio in my house that I can sit and turn on the game and hang out, because it does. You think of a studio, I think of a studio, and I think of kind of like almost an interrogation room.
Kind of sterile.
Very
walls.
sterile, white walls, and all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty homey. So it's very fascinating, very cool. So tell me the story about this table.
Yeah, so I work with a custom builder, Drevo Woods, Matthew Drevo, and he built the table in our conference room. And this is kind of a little bit of a testament to the DNA of the company. But the wood that was in the table in the conference room that he built before this one was wood that my dad and I cut down a 125-year-old oak tree because there's a pivot that needed to go by it, and it was dying, so we needed to get it out of the way. So we cut down that 125-year-old, probably older than that, oak tree, and they stacked those planks in our barn for like 6-7 years. So I completely forgot about it. And I was building a table, or wanted to build a table, and my dad's like, why don't you just use the wood from up there? And so Matthew took this old, pretty decrepit wood and made a beautiful conference table out of it. And then he came here, and I'm like, look, you did an amazing job on that. Like, what can you build for us in here? And he found this wood that was like completely just like beat to hell with just marks and gouges. Maybe you can see it on the film, but it's really beat up, and but they made it look beautiful because it was like I think it was the floor of a commercial trailer. So very rustic, very industrial, kind of like our brand, right? And that was the idea behind it, is like, it's sturdy, it's rigid, it's rough around the edges a little bit, and it's got a lot of history. And that's what I want our company to kind of become, is something that has a lot of history and a lot of meaning to it.
So you talked a little bit earlier, and I'm just all over the place on questions, but you talked a little bit earlier about Matt Talbot Kitchen and the work that you did for them, and it was kind of interesting to watch you talk about that, because you kind of had this, like, there's a little spark in your eye, your shoulders got a little, propped up, and you kind of leaned in a little bit and talked about it. So obviously that's an organization you care about, you like. What other kind of organizations like that in the community are you involved in? And then, what is it about those that draws you? Like, I love education, so when it comes to education stuff, I'm a huge sucker.
Yeah.
Everybody has their kind of thing. So what's your kind of thing?
So anything revolving around business and entrepreneurship outside of what they're doing there is super unique, and that's an incredible organization that really, really, truly helps Lincoln community. Like, if that was gone, a lot of people would be in a worse place.
It's fascinating. You talk about Matt Talbot Kitchen. I'm a huge sports fan. Did you hear what's happened in Athens, Ohio with Joe Burrow when he won the Heisman Trophy, and he talked about that had a huge impact. The community kitchen, kind of like a Matt Talbot thing. Like, I heard they've raised almost like $1 million just out of the blue.
Just by him talking about it. So it's kind of cool to see communities, kind of rally around those things and, what it means to the community. So that's kind of cool. So you mentioned other organizations. I would say LIBA is huge, right? So what you guys do at LIBA is incredibly important to the community because you give entrepreneurs, and even more so recently, as I've seen a kind of like more recent trend, giving entrepreneurs a reason to get together and not just transact, but really get to know each other. Because at the end of the day, like, if it's, a networking meeting and it's just a networking thing, and that's all it ends up being, like, sometimes those turn into relationships, but oftentimes they just end up being transactional. And you're like, oh yes, I know Dave from that CPA firm. I don't ever get that vibe when I leave a LIBA event. I always leave with like, oh, I met somebody really cool tonight. Like, and for instance, like Colton's a good example. Met Colton the other night, and he was so like high energy talking about all the potential of what's going to happen with this, with this group. And those are super important to young entrepreneurs in the community because it just shows you what's possible, just kind of like those podcasts do. Like when you see like somebody that started off with completely no business whatsoever, and they go from that to having a massive company in 5 years, and they've been a LIBA member that entire time. There's a reason they hold on to that membership. It means something to them. It helps them. And I know you have like a ton of is there 15-year partners or probably longer than that, right?
We're going to celebrate our 40th year. We got people who've been members 40 years.
You have members that have been there for 40 years. Yeah, and I was way offshooting that, but like that shows you, right? I mean, people don't hold on to things that they don't continue to pay annually for things that don't help them. And I think that's a really good testament to why, if you've been around for 40 years and you have members for 40 years, then you really are serving a good purpose to the community, similar to like a Matt Talbot. And I think that value proposition's become like more and more obvious as I've gotten more involved with it, and pumped to see like where it goes in the future and like how you continue to help entrepreneurs and, not even necessarily entrepreneurs, but people that are the business associated partner that's supposed to be working with LIBA, because even though it's it could be somebody that's an admin inside one of those firms that really gets a lot of joy of being around new people just at an event, something that simple. So I'm excited to see where the future of it goes too.
Cool. Thank you. It's a great organization. I love, I was a member before I became the CEO, and it's a cool place to be. So you have a lot of deep passion. You've kind of entered an area that I'll say is newer. And I say newer because old guys like me like this podcasting thing. I'm still getting used to all, books on tape, right?
Yeah.
But now I can put them on my phone, so I'm advancing.
Yeah.
But let's say you're talking to my daughter's second grade class about entrepreneurship, and what would be like the 2 or 3 things that you want, my 8-year-old, my 15-year-old, and my 19-year-old to know if they're interested in entrepreneurship? Like, here's some pieces of advice from a really young guy who's been very successful, that's built this. What kind of tips do you have for them?
I appreciate that. I've got a long ways to go though. Well, my advice for them would be, try different things. Try lots of different things out in the world, and don't get sucked into the idea that you have to be perfect at business by 18 or 20 or even 25, because you're going to be constantly learning. And if you even are self-aware enough to know that you want to be a business owner or an entrepreneur at like age, what age is she now?
8.
She's
my
8
my
years
youngest
old.
is 8.
She's 8
right?
year old, right? So like if you're an 8-year-old and you think like, I want to be that, you may grow up in 10, 15, 20 years and not. But at the end of the day, like following that path of that self-awareness where you kind of understand like who you are as a person and who, what makes you happiest and what really like lights you up. It's super easy for me to talk about this. This is all I do. It's all I care about. It's all I think about all day long. If you ask me to talk about something that I don't do all day long, this would be a really long conversation and quite boring, but it's not. And like, that's the important part, is helping them understand that they need to go try a bunch of different things to find out what they love, because not everybody is made to be, to do this. It's very difficult. And that's something else I would say is like, it's insanely lonely and it's difficult, and it's not for everybody. But at the end of the day, like if you do have that bug and you can't even fathom the idea of working, under somebody for that extended period of time, then it's worth it.
That's funny. Having worked in politics, we used to say that sometimes people get the political itch and they just need to give it a scratch. And I think fair. That, for young kids, I think that's great, and for them to pursue whatever's out there. I think of, I've been one of the luckiest guys in the world. I've had some really cool opportunities, and, I just, what if I just said no to this, or what if I hadn't done that?
Think about that all the time.
Where would I be today? And it's interesting because I love my life, and so it's a great testament to you for what you're doing. And so let's kind of wrap up here, and tell me a little bit about what you see for the future of. So today it's podcasting and getting hits through social media and those kind of things. What are some things that you think, like, let's watch out for in a few years? Or
So from the social media standpoint, I think that there'll continue to be apps that rise and fall. You saw Snapchat, or even you saw Facebook go from something that's just used by college kids at Harvard to now being something that my grandmother is on. Both my grandmothers are on at 84, 83 years old, right? And so you'll continue to see these platforms getting used by different demographics, and they'll become cool for a little while, and then some of them will phase out and some of them will stay. So you saw Vine come in, and it was white hot for a few years, and then it completely just died off once Twitter bought it, right? And I think what you'll continue to see is more apps that make people interact in a more organic way. And I think another thing that you'll see a lot more of is, and I learned this from attending a conference in New York called VoiceCon, another plug to kind of Gary Vee's type content, and voice activated devices I think are going to become huge. I watched a commercial of Amazon Alexa inside of a car. And when you think about that, the hands-free nature of where things are going, I think that marketers in general are going to have to start understanding these platforms of what does it look like to host an Amazon Alexa skill through AWS Workspace. And you're going to have to, agencies, if they want to continue to keep up, they're going to have to answer those questions. They're going to have to partner with firms that are really good at answering those questions.
See, for a guy like me, I'd ask that you just keep speaking the same language that I am, because you lost me.
Yeah, so
you might as well have been when you ask perfect Swahili right there.
So when you ask Alexa to you ask Alexa to put on your favorite podcast, that's something that you can do right now, right? That happens every day. But what's going to be really interesting in the future is when you're not only hailing rides from a Lyft or an Uber through this. I just think that communication is just going to become quicker and a lot more, and it'll be less of this and a lot more of just talking to a device that does things for you.
That's fascinating. And you talk about the evolution of things. When we got our first answering machine, it was a big deal in my house, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But I think the computers when I was in high school were 5% of what this thing does. This was a supercomputer. This was the NASA server here. But the way it's evolved, my 19-year-old doesn't even go on. She's not even on Facebook.
No.
It's not even she's got past the Facebook generation. I'm how does that happen? I'm just kind of learning how to boost a post.
You're asking her, can you get on Facebook?
Well, yeah, but she's on Twitter.
Yeah. And
so it's just, and they're on, the two older ones are both on Twitter and Instagram, and it's wow, that's just the way it evolves, and the fast way that things change. Mm-hmm. Cell phones. When I was in high school, cell phones weren't a thing. When I was in college, I had a summer job where they gave me a thing that looked like a cinder block that I carried around. And then it was really cool because they're and we're going to get you a pager.
Nice. There
so
you go.
I had a pager and this brick. That,
Tom Cruise
I might as well be carrying around a freaking cinder block. Like I was a construction worker, and I was like, but to see like where those kinds of things come, I think technology is just a fascinating thing, and the way in which we communicate, I think, is one of the things you talked about too. And I look forward to the day where we're not this and we're this. Mm-hmm. Because I think, in my opinion, this is the most important thing. I talk a lot about relationships, and I think when you're like this, it's hard to establish a relationship. But when you're like this, and maybe it'll help, we joke about like kids look up instead of look down,
right. Yeah, I think that gets picked on a lot, obviously. Like, you see people texting in public and not talking to each other, that sort of thing. I think it gets picked on a lot. I mean, I'm a big believer in a little bit of both. I'm not going to completely demonize the idea of a text message, but I'm also not completely against the idea of like face-to-face communication, because at the end of the day, like, you have to be able to look people in the eye, especially if you want to be a successful entrepreneur. In my opinion, you need to be able to look people in the eye, shake their hand, and be able to like say confidently that you need to be able to have a conversation with them. And yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thinking to do on that subject as I raise kids, because
absolutely.
But one thing that you have to think about too is that, and a lot of parents I think that have to think about is, you're raising kids in a society that this is all that happening, that your phone's on this table for a reason. It's because it's important, really important to you, and
I don't want to sit on it.
And you don't want to sit on it. But like, mine's at my feet for a reason. That like we're tethered to these devices, and it's not going to change. If anything, it's going to get even more tethered, through bio. But
I love the fact that you can, like, when I was so it's kind of ironic, like our oldest goes to college 600 miles away. Okay, so she drove home from college for Christmas. And like, when I was in college, it was like, well, I'm going to leave somewhere between 2 and 4, which puts me in Lincoln anytime between 4 and 6, right? Because I was out in Kearney. And, it was.
Yeah.
But like with her, she was driving home yesterday, and I just sent her a text early in the morning, and I was like, hey, be careful. It looks like you could see some snow. Okay, cool, thanks. But then it was like, hey, next time you stop, just shoot me a text, let me know where you are. And so I love like that part about it, right? And so I think it's amazing. But also, like, if something happens, we know exactly where you are.
Right.
It's just like this. You talk about weighing it as a parent too.
Yeah.
Because like the way it was with the oldest, with the middle, and with the youngest is going to be completely different, just because of the evolution. But the quickness with which, my first cell phone was a flip phone.
Yeah.
That was about the size of a business card, really, and you flipped it open, and just the technology is just amazing. So like, to be sitting here recording a podcast.
To think about that.
That's like so far beyond like what I ever thought I would do in my life. Like it's like, okay.
My dad probably thought the same thing when he was sitting there.
A video, we've got the video going, we got producers here, we got the microphones. It's a fascinating business that you've built and branded here.
I appreciate that. And think about this for a second. So my buddy Phil has a kid that was 3 years old when this all happened, and I think he had 3 or 4 years old. And he walked up and he said, "Daddy, it's not working." And he walks up to the TV and he's swiping the TV to try and get the TV to work and to come on. That is how these kids are going to be programmed at 4 years old. Yeah. So imagine the sort of tech that, I look at this as a standpoint of like, you have to keep up with it, because it'll leave you in the dust. And so if you're not keeping up with that, whether it's marketing or just your personal devices at all, if you don't keep up with them, they're going to leave you in the dust. Because if you picked one of those up and you hadn't touched one for 5 years, man, you'd be slow with it. But if it's
and it's amazing, because you're right. Like with little kids, like my 8-year-old, it's like, Daddy, can I have your phone here? Put your password in. Do
know
this,
exactly what to
whatever.
do. Whatever.
And it's like,
yeah,
okay, and it is hard because, like, I never had my own telephone until I went to college, and there was a phone in the dorm. Like, we had a house phone that everybody called, and you had to be careful when your buddies called or your friends called, because you didn't want your parents knowing how much you're on the phone, right?
Right.
And now we're in a device where I can look up how much my daughter's been on the phone today or whatever.
Right.
It's just, so technology is such an ever-changing thing. It's amazing. So I look forward to seeing kind of the things that you do here at Grindstone and what it's going to be, and appreciate you taking the time to have us in and kind of have the conversation. And
yeah, thank you for interviewing and for coming up with some really good questions. That's definitely have a knack for this. So
what's your closing comments or thoughts about Grindstone that you want to just share?
From a Grindstone standpoint, I just hope that in the next 5 to 10, 15, 20 years that we continue to double, constantly, and think of, best ourselves every single year, and I'm a pretty big believer in constant, never-ending improvement. And I don't ever want to look back from one year to the next, be like, oh yeah, that was just like the last year. That scares the hell out of me. So I want to be able to look back and see a absolute change from a year-to-year standpoint. That's what I think
you'll absolutely do that.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so.
I mean, a year and a half ago, you were in your apartment floor.
That's true.
I mean, think about that. 18 months. That's a heck of a jump.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And thank you for, like I said, having me on.
This is fun. This is a lot of fun. So, all right. I think we're good.
Awesome.